feel your calf is contracting, it's hard, right? But as you're putting your heel down on the ground, you're lengthening that calf muscle, you're lengthening that gastrocnemius and the soleus. And so that's an eccentric contraction, sort of contraction, but while the muscles are doing, it's twitching and whatnot, the cross-bridge cycling, the length of the muscles is increasing. So those are both isotonic contractions, but we have two flavors of them. And they do two very different things, and we'll talk about what they do in a couple of slides. But I want to relate this to more of a spectrum. The difference between isotonic and isometric contraction is really a spectrum here. And it relates to this idea of the force velocity curve. The idea is as you increase the load on the muscle, so whatever you're moving is getting heavier and heavier, the velocity of that shortening, or the velocity of that contraction, is decreasing. So basically, the muscle length change is getting slower as the load is getting heavier. And that kind of makes sense, right? It is. So if you took this box, imagine this paper towel as a box, and I'm going to put it on the table. It's really light. I can do this pretty easily, right? But as it's getting heavier, I have to slowly put it down, right? Or I can just, assuming I'm still contracting, if I want to ease it down, it's going to take more and more force from my muscles, right? And if it's a huge box that I can't carry, I'm not going to move it, right? And so the idea is, as the load is increasing, the velocity is shortening. The velocity of shortening is decreasing. So if the load's really light, I can move my muscles really quickly. The velocity of shortening is really quick. But the load is really heavy, it's not going to happen. So, given that, where on this curve do you think you can find an isometric contraction? Is it point A, C, E? What point do you think it is?
E.
It's E. Think about it. E is point where the velocity is 0, but the load is maximal. Remember, isometric contractions, there is no change in length, aka there is no velocity. Right? So this is where you have an isometric contraction. And then everything else is considered an isotonic contraction. Isotonic contractions mean the muscles is shortening or lengthening, doesn't really matter, but it has some velocity. It has a velocity greater than 0. So that muscle length change in time is non-zero, essentially. And so so this is kind of how you can think of isotonic contractions. Isotonic contractions can approach isometric contractions as the load gets heavier. Now, we're not going to talk about the mechanics of why this occurs in muscles. That is a little theoretical, and you don't need to know it right away. But you need to know this relationship. And so, when do you think you can have maximal velocity then? At what point do you have maximal velocity? A, right? At this point. So essentially, in order for you to have really fast reflexes, there has to be essentially no load on your muscles. That's the idea, right? So if you or some kind of critter want to, let's say, sprint really quickly or punch something or attack something really quickly, you need to have a light load, right? But the heavier the load is, heavier arm is, you're not going to have as fast reactions. That's kind of the idea behind the muscles and the speed that they contract. Alright. So your muscles work as a mechanical unit. They're doing mechanical work for you, right? They're moving your body around, they're doing stuff for you in a mechanical realm, right? They're working with the physics of the world, gravity, things like that. And so the types of contractions kind of tell you how your muscle's behaving. And so this might not sound super clear yet, but let me go through each of the contractions and hopefully this makes more sense. So here we have a concentric contraction. Remember, this is your muscle contracting and your muscle shortening. So I'm taking this dumbbell and I'm bringing it over here. Alright. Oh, shit. This is the wrong picture. Always. Alright, so this is the wrong picture. Always. Why do I do this? Alright, this picture goes here, this picture goes here. Sorry about that. I'll fix that and post new version online. But a concentric reaction acts like a motor. Right? Motor produces mechanical energy, and it can push an object a certain distance, right? That's what a motor does. It outputs mechanical work. Or mechanical energy, you can think about it, right? So I can move this thing from here to here because I'm doing a concentric contraction. Well, let's do the other side. We have an eccentric contraction, right? Remember I gave you the example of you walking downstairs, or you going down walking down a down slope, and you're slowly easing your heels onto the ground, contracting your calves, right? Well, that's more like a brake. This dissipates instead of creating mechanical work. This is dissipating. It's getting rid of mechanical work. It's slowing yourself down, right? Because think about it. If you are walking downstairs, or you're walking down a slope, and you weren't contracting your calves, you would just slam your heels into the ground, right? And that's bad, right? All that, there's a shock from you slamming your heel onto the ground, and that would hurt your joints, that would hurt your bones, hurt your muscles, tendons, and whatnot. So that's why you ease your heel down every time you take a step downstairs or down a slope. And so when you're easing your heel down, you're dissipating energy, dissipating that mechanical energy that's produced by gravity, right? If you haven't noticed this, walk down those stairs. Notice what you do with your heels. Same thing, like if I want to pick up this monitor, right, and I want to ease it down, that's an eccentric contraction, right? I'm not just letting go of my arms and slamming it onto the table, right? I would break the monitor. I'm easing it down. I'm dissipating the energy, the potential energy it had from gravity. So that's why an eccentric contraction is considered like a brake. It dissipates mechanical energy. And lastly, you have the isometric contraction, and this is considered a strut. It's just making sure that it's supporting whatever structure in its current position. So I'm holding this box, and I'm just keeping it here. It's like as if you had a strut that was keeping it in place. So if you don't know what a strut is, go look at your shelf. Sometimes your shelf will have this kind of crossbar that kind of keeps it in place, right? And if you remove that crossbar, the shelf will topple over and it will unload whatever it's carrying, right? Well, that's a strut, right? That's just the whole job of a strut is to keep something fixed, right? Yes?
For the concentric and the eccentric, is there like a direct correlation with the antagonistic muscle as well?
Usually not. When you have an antagonist muscle, usually you inhibit its contraction.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that antagonist muscle should not be contracting. It shouldn't be doing like an eccentric contraction and all that. The idea is you don't have that antagonistic muscle contract.
Okay.
The only time you would have it contract is if you want your limb to act like a strut. So if I want my forearm not to move in either direction, then both my bicep and tricep are contracting at the same time to keep my forearm stiff. That'd be more like a strut. But we're not thinking about that situation right now. So this is what I mean when muscles can act as mechanical units. They can either produce mechanical energy by doing a contraction reaction, they can act as a strut to keep something fixed in space, or they can dissipate energy like a brake if they do an eccentric contraction. Does that make sense? Alright, so now we're going to move on to a topic I'm not as big of a fan of, but it's nevertheless a topic in muscles, is smooth muscles. So smooth muscles are a very interesting type of muscle. Unlike skeletal muscles, they don't have too much consistency in how they work. They're highly variable in the ways they contract. They're highly variable in the ways they get innervated. They're highly variable in the way they communicate with one another. And so it's kind of hard to talk about smooth muscles in a consistent way that I've been talking about skeletal muscle. And so I'm going to try my best. I'm going to try to generalize it, kind of give you the key points that you can find across many smooth muscles. But just keep in mind that not everything you learn here is going to apply to every single smooth muscle in the body. They all work slightly differently. And so smooth muscle, as you can see in this picture, have a very different shape. They have these weird kind of what we call fusiform muscle shapes. So when you looked at a skeletal muscle, it kind of looked like this rigid tube that had a whole bunch of striation, right? This was kind of like skeletal muscle. Oops, I can't spell skeletal. Skeletal muscle, right? Smooth muscles don't have that. They look more oblong. They have one nucleus instead of multiple nuclei, and they don't have any striation. And that's because they really don't have any sarcomeres. They don't have that nice kind of structural pattern you would see inside a muscle cell. Moreover, they have differences in their twitches. So these are all single twitches here, and so here we have skeletal. It is the shortest duration twitch. Then you have cardiac. You have cardiac muscle, which is slightly longer, but then you have the smooth muscle, which is just ridiculously long duration of twitch. And so there's definitely different mechanics that can afford this, basically, this long duration twitch. You find smooth muscle basically wherever you find autonomic processes. Anytime you have an autonomic process, there's probably a smooth muscle behind it. So that means vasodilation or vasoconstriction of blood vessels, dilation and constriction of your pupils, pretty much any sphincter in your body, whether it's in the GI tract or otherwise. All of those, basically, when your hair is standing up, all of that is basically